trigger happy and I give less than a fuck. Love me or hate me, I'ma show enough, rip shit up. It's Mr. Nothing, nice on a mic stand. Mic in the left and the zest in my right hand. I took a puff, had enough now, hold up. If that was Indo, niggas getting rolled up.
What's going on, folks? This is Acid Roots. I'm going to review the most recent and, as of this moment, final album by Creed. This is their 4th album, and it dropped a whopping 8 years after Weathered in 2001. So, if you're looking for more Creed, if you kind of wonder what happened between Weathered and this album, Full Circle, Scott Stapp, the vocalist of Creed, did drop his debut album once Creed broke up, and it was called The Great Divide. I reviewed that on this channel. You can find it if you look around. I would recommend going to the Creed reviews playlist that I've made. And basically that's very similar. It's post-grunge, just like Creed typically is. Very similar. Basically, to me, was the Creed album if there would have been one in 2005. Pretty decent. I mean, maybe it didn't have quite as massive of hits that they did on Weathered and Human Clay, but it's pretty close. I mean, I definitely give that record credit. It's definitely kind of underrated and not talked about as much as it should be. But I would say another thing that I'm going to review, this is not the finale to Creed's catalog. There is like some retrospectives of like B-sides and Lucy's that I'm going to review after this. Maybe not this month or within the next few weeks, but definitely soon enough I'll get that covered, and then everything by Creed will be done. So basically about this project, this is a pretty solid release. I mean, initially I didn't think so, but the more I listened to it, it was pretty good. The 3 great singles, nice 2009-2010 rendition of what Creed was up to. I mean, obviously, I think they missed their prime. In my opinion, I think if they would have dropped an album in 2004 or late 2003 or early 2005, I think that record probably would have went diamond, because they really went out on a high point with Weathered in 2001. They were basically one of the biggest bands in rock music in the year 2002 and the last little smidge of 2001. But I definitely would have said that, you know, they were at pretty much a fever pitch in 2003 when they decided to go their separate ways, just because like Scott Stapp had been kind of on pills and alcohol throughout his shows and was not really that much of a good performer around that time, which is really a colossal disappointment, just because they had so much. Like I said, they were at a fever pitch after Weather. They charted huge album, went 6 times platinum. Like I said, one of the bigger things in rock music, and then they just pulled the plug on it just like that in 2004. Mark Tremonti, who I think is the guitarist, he formed the band Alter Bridge in 2004, and they dropped an album that year. And Scott Stapp did a solo album in 2005, which I would say Alter Bridge did better than Scott Stapp, but I think I prefer the Scott Stapp album more because that's just more Creed sounding. Because it really is a shame that Creed did not drop more music. It was just 3 albums was way too thin for them. But this is their return to form, and it's basically like the rendition of what would have happened around this time, the early 2010s. I just kind of feel like they obviously nailed it, but I think like the ship had sailed in terms of like what they were supposed to do. This album, had it come out in 2005, would have went out over better. It's not bad, but I just feel like, you know, rock music had kind of shape shifted and changed from the concept of how dominant they were 8 years before that. And that just really happens to be the remark about that. I mean, they do have some good music, so I'll talk about the 3 singles. So the first single was Overcome. Sounds just like a typical post-grunge song from Creed. Reminds me just of stuff from like Weathered. Same kind of, basically kind of, it's not so much hard rock or metal. It's kind of a song that you would have heard off of Human Clay or Weathered, something like that. They're typical, maybe not typical in a bad way, but just usual suspects type stuff for what would have happened with Creed. It's just a 2009 rendition of it. Great hook. Great overall feel, this easy-going song, a nice single overall as far as that could have went. Really had not too many complaints. I mean, once again, it's such a damn shame that Creed was not on like their 5th or 6th album by this point, because it's just a taste of like what Creed was supposed to be doing. But it's good. I mean, it's definitely a great first single. Second single was Rain. This one was kind of not quite as ferocious, not quite as post-grunge. Just kind of had like a real kind of folksy kind of sounding. It sounded not down-tempo, not up-tempo, but kind of like a folk mid-tempo type song, where it's describing something like it says in the chorus you can tell that it's going to rain, and this is it's getting ready to be sad, but kind of almost peppy, trying to put a smile on your face despite the fact that it's going to be sad. It's kind of taking that production, so it's not quite a typical tears all over the place tear jerker that most songs that would be called rain, that would be down tempo, kind of is. It's not as down tempo as you might think from a song called Rain, at least in a sad version of a song called Rain. So it's just kind of one of that. It's decent. I liked it. Just it kind of almost felt like something you could still listen to with your buddies in a backyard during like a smoke session, something like that. Still, it was a decent. It was a good attempt at like a sad song, but not overly emotional tearjerker. So it's a sad song, but it's not got the sheer kind of emoting and just like overall, like I said, tear jerking that you'd normally find on songs like that. So it's good. They kept it kind of concise and just, permissible as far as being able to listen to like sadder songs. And so A Thousand Faces kind of brought up the tempo again. Yeah, I mean, A Thousand Faces sounds very similar to Overcome. I would definitely kind of say that they're both kind of post grunge sounding, very mellow and kind of ambient in like a dissonant kind of way. Just the way that they kind of are. Not, once again, not ferocious, not in your face and feisty, but just kind of has like a real kind of typical, just a substandard kind of form of Creed to kind of say, once again, this is just the 2010 rendition of that. It's kind of low key and just doesn't quite have the bite to be like a number one or number two single, but I definitely would have felt like it's good Creed, and that's probably more important considering that they took 8 years off. So that's what you have to come into this project knowing. For the most part, they may have tried briefly to rekindle the sheer firepower that they had back in 2001. I think they probably realized throughout the promotion of this album that it probably wasn't going to happen. But it's not to say, I mean, on the rock charts it did good, but the thing about Creed is they used to be a pop rock band that could hit number 4 on the Billboard 100 or number 8 or something like that. They were all stars back in the day. So I just felt like they just kind of reverted back to just, stellar, maybe not excellent, but decently stellar rock band that can at least get some good numbers on the rock charts. But A Thousand Faces really underperformed, but it's good post grunge, I will say that. So that's kind of the concept there. It's not too little too late for Creed, this album, because it is good, but I just feel like they stunted their growth by not putting this record out sooner and coming to their senses and trying to rekindle things, because it's just like, I don't know if it's just a battle of the egos. I mean, I don't want to blame wholesomely Scott Stapp because he's a pretty talented vocalist and musician. I kind of feel like it's just kind of the question of just having like some sort of mediator. It's kind of like what happened with any rap group, rock group, or pop group, anything like that. I mean, once musicians aren't on the same page, and it's anyone's angle as to who you can believe as to whose fault it is. I mean, Scott Stapp was on drugs, but it had been 8 years. You would think by like 2005 or something they would have said, well, let's try again. But yeah, so there are a number of hits on here. Like, I'll go ahead and list them for you. So I like 7 songs out of 12 on here. I'll go ahead and list them. So Overcome, A Thousand Faces, Good Fight, On My Sleeve, Away in Silence, Suddenly, and Rain are the ones I recommend to you. Now, I feel like Good Fight had one of the most snaking and kind of just overall stellar and just propelling post-grunge on here. Just real kind of ambient production that was as good as like the single Overcome, and definitely better than A Thousand Faces. I mean, they're both good, but I feel like Overcome was probably slightly better than Thousand Faces. But so On My Sleeve is kind of like typical kind of kind of hazy and depressed post-grunge that Creed is so good at doing. Away in Silence kind of reminds me of One Last Breath from Weathered. Suddenly kind of is one of the few songs that I like this new fever pitch and kind of crazy and just metal Creed. I really like the riff on Suddenly. They did it a lot better on that song. And then Rain was, like I described that, just being a kind of depressed but still somewhat peppy kind of mid-tempo song. So, but a few of the complaints on this release, I feel like songs like Bread of Shame and Fear try a more kind of metal Creed that just doesn't work that well. I feel like Creed really reached like a particular niche spot by delivering like stellar post grunge. They're definitely one of the frontal faces of post grunge, and I feel like them trying to do metal now, they should have done that back in the day. It doesn't come off as good. It sounds kind of hammy and not, I don't know. It's a new trick that just was not pulled off well. I definitely felt as if like there's just better metal bands. Creed has a better situation. They're simply better as post grunge and pop rock. Those are more their angles. I mean, it's a nice, decent trick, but they just needed better riffs to be able to attempt it. I kind of felt like, and like they also have like kind of a pretty lengthy post grunge kind of depressed kind of vibe on Time. I felt like that song should have been probably at least a minute and a half shorter. I mean, I did somewhat like the riff on that song. It kind of sounds like, once again, typical post grunge Creed, but it was just a little bit too long of a song to really kind of nail its execution. Probably needed to be like 3 minutes, 45 seconds, 4 minutes, 10 seconds, something like that, and it would have been pretty good. I just felt like it kind of wailed on for too long. The song you sing didn't have a good enough riff. That one sounded like a worse rendition of something they would have done on Weathered. Just songs like that, I mean, missed opportunities in terms of like poor uh, heavy metal songs and like this awkward kind of post grunge moments. And I feel like Full Circle could have used a better riff also. I mean, some of these, this felt like, I mean, I think Creed realized at this stage that maybe they weren't going to have like a world tour. It just felt like a very concise album. They didn't really seem like they wanted to promote this project that much. They didn't have the attempt behind it that they did with Weathered or Human Clay. It felt like they were just like, we wanted to put out standard promotion, 2 or 3 singles, wrap it up, and move on to the next release. And that was kind of the thing. So there just were some blunders on here that probably could have been like the 3rd or 4th single if they had chosen it correctly, but it just felt like a standard package. Just you get your brief kind of promotional run from it, and then the record's on the shelf. So it just doesn't have the draw distance of Weathered or Human Clay. Probably better draw distance than My Own Prison, but that's not saying much because that was their debut project. So that's kind of the concept there. I'm going to give this record out of 10 a 6.5 out of 10. I felt like it was good, but considering Creed's normal, like if they would have had the hits that they had on here combined with the sheer velocity and hit potential that they had on Weathered, I probably would have given this project like a 9 out of 10 or higher, or an 8.5, 9 out of 10 or so, something like that in that range, just because I appreciate the package of what they did on here, but it's just kind of disappointing how kind of truncated it kind of is. It just kind of feels like it's very kind of cut off, and just like it feels like I noticed that they missed the moment, but I don't know if it doesn't quite have it just doesn't have the sheer velocity that they had on Weathered. I don't know if they were just trying to get back into the swing of things and they were just a little rusty, but kind of the concept about it is I look after this release and I don't know what it was. I mean, there's just something about it as far as trying to say, yeah, it kind of felt like they just were purposely thinking narrowly. I think that's definitely the concept. They were purposely thinking narrowly and just not quite as broad-minded as they had been in the past. That's something to pay attention to. I mean, obviously this wound up being their final Creed record, but just to kind of say and stuff, I mean, yeah, this wound up being the final Creed record, but just to kind of say, is just kind of, I mean, that's the whole concept is just, it's kind of, when they say full circle, that's definitely something to pay attention to, because you look at the scope of things as if like, seeing what they were on Weathered and how much energy they had back then compared to how grizzled, and they actually feel more weathered on this release than they did on the actual record Weathered. It just kind of feels different for them to be so grizzled. And I mean, it's not like they were over the hill at this time, but just the concept that it was just kind of seeing the insight that they were not quite as starry eyed and still looking to like wanting to like, shoot for the stars still in terms of that. And maybe that was their attitude, but it just felt, looking upon what had happened, it's just kind of, it's a disappointing thing. This is the final Creed album, at least to this point, and, like it definitely would have felt like something that they should have, truly had the punch for. I don't know if it was just because, well, yeah, it's just kind of, 3 brief singles when their old days used to be filled with star power and firepower and that type stuff. That's just kind of the concept. So the social score, like I was saying, I will give it a 7 out of 10, the social score, just because three singles did well, but A Thousand Faces really didn't chart that well, and Rain is kind of like not quite as ferocious and just quite as magnetic as Overcome. So it may feel like this is just a one-hit wonder on this album, but it just depends upon how you like the tempo of like Rain, because A Thousand Faces was really, I don't think many folks are going to hear that on the radio too much, because it was kind of like a lumbering third single. It only hit 22 out of 25 on the rock chart, so that's kind of the thing there. But yeah, it's just, it's just kind of it feels like it's kind of like a fond memory of Creed, but it's not enough to really rekindle stuff, and it's just too bad because they really could have been one of the faces of rock music for a good while had they done that. It's just, that's, it's kind of how that went. But so yeah, in terms of the future, like one other thing to kind of say of note of this is the fact that Creed did have a fifth album that they tried recording in 2011 and 2012. It'd be interesting if they were to ever put that out one day and kind of get that release in motion, just to kind of say what could happen there, because I would like to hear it, especially the singles that could have happened. That's about the closest thing I could think to a future Creed album, unless they do eventually ever come back and decide to do something else. But it's getting, I mean, this is the thing. It's been almost it's been 15 years since this record came out. So that's kind of the concept. But that's, I look after it, and I would like to hear that 2012 Creed album. It's like, damn, we need to hear that just to wonder the true stuff that Creed had up their sleeve, and just to see what they were cooking up back in those days. But all right, folks.